Yeah, I mean, my story starts where my family story starts, really, so many people from Winnipeg come as immigrants, and, a lot of us are children of immigrants, and with that comes a lot of struggle. And so, my parents came to Canada. My dad fled on foot, my mom fled on foot from Ethiopia during a really turbulent time. They managed to make it to Sudan, where they lived in a refugee camp for many years. And then after that, they looked for a place to live outside of East Africa, and they moved to Canada. So my family moved to Canada. I was born here, and I grew up with my parents. At the beginning it was normal. Nothing was wrong really. And although we lived in some difficult neighborhoods throughout Winnipeg, government housing, immigrant refugee centers, we still had a pretty decent childhood up until I was about 12 years old, and my parents divorced. And, although my parents wanted the best for us, it was difficult because now we were living with single parents who came to Canada with nothing, who were starting off and trying to figure out a life for themselves. But, we were so young, we didn't really pay attention to that. So as my parents continued to move around the city looking for their home, we were moving around with them. But then because they were both separately figuring out their lives, we had to adapt to two different lifestyles. My mom would move from one neighborhood to another, getting close to her new jobs, and my dad was doing the same thing. And so we started to be in environments that were not really helping us succeed. We lived downtown in some really dangerous neighborhoods at a time in Canada where at a time in Winnipeg where it was the most dangerous city in Canada.
Yeah.
We had the most murder rates, there was the most crime happening. And I just remember like sometimes going outside and seeing fights on the street just casually, right? And
Classic
yeah,
Winnipeg.
just like you were so used to it, right? Shootings happening, stabbings happening. And for us, that was our normal. And we didn't really understand what like a normal, peaceful, happy life was like. And so from age, I would say 11 till I was, in graduated high school, it was a lot of that. And then I became one of those people that was getting involved in crime because that was normal to me. I didn't see anything else. And we spent a lot of time with our mom growing up, and so she started working 3 jobs to try to put food on our table. And my brothers and I, we would take advantage of that sometimes. So she would work from 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. and we were in high school. So what does that mean? Party, right? Like go outside, leave the house, and we got into a lot of trouble because of that. And we'd be stealing all the time. We'd be like sometimes there'd be stolen cars around. We didn't really have respect for the law, and we didn't take authority well. And so school was difficult, and the reason I wanted to speak at River East is because my experience there, although I played basketball and football, and although, for the beginning I had a decent time at River East, it was there where I started getting into a lot of trouble. So when I turned 15, at this point, I already got caught stealing a few times. I've already had multiple run-ins with the law, but now I was turning it up a little bit. I was selling weed. I was completely comfortable, breaking in to a car or something like that. Like I didn't really care. And I just kept accumulating charges. I was getting arrested multiple times, and then it became no big deal. Like I would get released and I'd be like, oh, at least I didn't go to jail. And whereas most people would be like, oh my gosh, I got arrested, right?
Yeah.
And I started hanging out with the wrong crowd. All my friends at the time were doing the same thing. Like it was so normal. We didn't have any other people around us that were showing us that this is not the way. And when I turned 17, at this point I already had multiple run-ins with the law, and I was arrested. And this time the police was saying that, you're going to be going to jail. This is the end for you. And I remember I didn't really believe it. I didn't clock it. And we ended up going to the Manitoba Youth Center. So I was still underage. I was still 17 years old. And I got there, and, they were doing this, massive background check on me. And then eventually they took me into my cell. And, I mentioned this in my speech, but I remember waking up the next morning, not realizing fully that I was in jail, and trying to open the door. And I'm literally like pulling the door, and it wouldn't open. And, you know, every morning when you wake up, first thing you do is probably use the washroom. Like, you just walk outside of your bedroom, right? Yeah. I couldn't open the door. And I had a cellmate who I'd never met before, clearly. And he was like, what are you doing, man? Like, this is jail. You can't just open the door and get out. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I immediately was just so sad, so sad. And in that moment, I had to realize, like, all the things that I've done wrong in my life, I'm suffering right now. And I ended up staying there. It was supposed to be like 3 days. It ended up being 8 months.
Damn.
8 months in jail on my first time. And yeah, I ended up pleading guilty and accepting like all the responsibility that I did, all the mistakes that I made. And my goal was to eventually come out of this like a different person. And while I was in jail, I decided to focus on changing everything that brought me in there, which was, you know, a lack of caring about authority in school. I started looking at jail as an opportunity to learn and to change. So I started to try to read a lot more. So I probably read like 40 different books while I was in there. At this point, I never read a book before that, really, you know, unless I was forced to by school. I started to like make my bed every morning. I started to, you know, I tried to respect like the law in there because I didn't want to leave and do the same thing I did in the past. And then from there, once I ended up getting out, that's when like things completely changed. And that's like a whole separate part of my story.
Can